David, we're going to do something a little bit different today. I think a lot of people are aware that you and I do a show every Friday on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. But we're approaching the middle of the month, and we wanted everybody on YouTube to get a chance to see the show. How are you today, David?
I'm very well, Jason. Good to be with you.
It's good to be with you, and I'm really enjoying this new and improved video image. You're looking so high definition and better frame rate, and everything is really looking great over there. Now, you have been putting out some posts, of course, on your Patreon page. For people who haven't been following you on there, I think it's important that they head over and take a look. You've got a post today, of all things, about Burning Man. I did not know that you were a follower of Burning Man, David.
Well, I wasn't until I found it's a very evocative term when you think about it, particularly in the context of the forest fires that are ringing and threatening Sydney, where I lived for a while, and the kind of forest fires that have taken over parts of California.
Yeah. Because
it occurred to me, I would say over the last 2 or 3 days when I heard about Burning Man, wouldn't it be interesting if the folks behind Burning Man, which is this festival in California, apparently attended by up to 70,000 people, wouldn't it be interesting if the people who are in charge of the pyrotechnic displays at these events had the kind of technology where, wittingly or unwittingly, the people attending the event said, hey, if we can do that to a burning man in the desert, why couldn't we do it to the Twin Towers, or why couldn't we do it in Paradise or in Sydney, and actually create an effect where the more gullible amongst us will say, oh, this is proof of global warming. So I started, as you know, one of the techniques I use is always to go into the details of the play that is being staged by these people, and then see in the patent office if I could find anything that might fit the signature at the crime scene. And I've found the most amazing patent, right? Which is
but wait, David, let me stop you a second before we get into the details, because I don't know that much about Burning Man. And when you say if we can do it to a Burning Man in the desert, we can do it to the World Trade Center, what is it exactly? I guess they have this big giant structure that looks like some kind of a man and they burn it, but tell us what it's all about.
Okay, well, I'm just going to read because I can't do better than that. I can't remember of all the kind of identities that show up at this ceremony. This is, someone did a sort of social analysis of the Burning Man phenomena. I think it sounds like a cult, but let me just read it. It's one paragraph, and it's in that post today, so perhaps you can put it up, while I'm reading it.
Sure.
For the first few years in the desert, Burning Man remained an anarchic, unregulated get-together with a heavy emphasis on performance art and pyrotechnics. Each year, attendance more or less doubled, growing from 250 in 1991 to 4,000 in 1995. Campers were individually responsible for bringing everything with them that they needed to survive in the desert, but when they arrived, they grouped themselves in a circle around the then 40-foot tall man. As one visitor in 1995 described the scene, there are all sorts here, a living, breathing encyclopedia of subcultures. Now here's where it gets interesting. Desert survivalists, urban primitives, artists, rocketeers, hippies, deadheads, queers, pyromaniacs, cybernauts, musicians, ranters, echo freaks, acid heads, breeders, punks, gun lovers, dancers, S&M and bondage enthusiasts, nudists, refugees from the men's movement, anarchists, ravers, transgender types, and New Age spiritualists. Would you fit into any of those, Jason?
I don't know. Not really, I don't think. I'd have to hear it again.
Well, what intrigues me is one phrase that jumps. One phrase that jumps out is pyromaniacs.
Right.
Right. So you've got this organization that builds a man made out of baskets or wood or whatever it is, puts together a very elaborate pyrotechnic display, and then destroys it. And someone I know has said that they had a friend who went to one of these shows, and it was basically or they described it, if I got it right, as a nihilistic cult.
Yeah.
Anyway, so now, then I started looking around to see, well, who puts on the pyrotechnics? And I won't read the whole detail, but let me just give you the name or the title of this, and maybe again you could show it up on the screen. The title is Precision Fireworks Display System Having a Decreased Environmental Impact. And what it is apparently the projectiles that are sent up have a very accurate elevation sensor device, so they go off at a very precise altitude above the ground, which obviously helps the kind of displays. But what intrigued me is that the current assignee was Disney Enterprises.
Oh yeah, look at that.
So I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if these people who put these shows together, and there's a couple of expert pyrotechnicians apparently that use, I think that some of the phrases I'm not familiar with, but let's say showtime. During the program, Becky watches script in hand and calls cues to a crew member at the control board with a pinboard firing system. Anyway, so I looked around, found a system in the patent office that would fit that description that's been assigned to Disney. So then I asked myself, well, after these shows, why wouldn't they, let's say, take the pinboard firing system onto floor 47 of the North Tower on the morning of 9/11, where Serco shareholders show up, and let them take a position on the outcome of a pyrotechnic event that is aimed to demolish the Twin Towers? Wouldn't that be interesting?
Well, I mean,
sorry, you were going to say?
I don't know. I mean, how do we know that they would do that? I mean, how would fireworks burn down the building?
Well, this is really interesting, and let me just describe what might happen inside those elevator shafts. You could drop these munitions, right, from the top of the building, such that as they come down, they go through a certain elevation, which is then triggered, and you get that top-down demolition effect that we see in Towers 1 and Towers 2. So at that meeting of the shareholders, right, which include the British government, the Saudi Arabian government, and the Singaporean government, what they could be presented with is opportunities to participate in what's known as a catastrophe bond. That is to say, you could sponsor a catastrophe bond where you make a great deal of money if both towers came down in the same day, and the investors would lose a great deal of money. That's the nature of the bond. If, however, both towers don't come down the same day, the sponsors hand their money over to the investors. So that's intriguing, because up to then, no steel frame building had ever come down through fires. Let me just jump straight away to Sydney. Sydney is now ringed with fires, where the Australian police say that of all the fires that have been set, generally about 15% are provable arson, right, and 35% are suspicious.
Wow.
That means up to 50% of these fires, and the same, I can guarantee you, Jason, would apply it in California, up to 50% of these fires are suspicious. That is to say, they could have been set by arsonists or pyromaniacs of the type that show up at those Burning Man ceremonies in California. Right. So now, the thing that I think we have to consider is, have they created an international network where they can move these specialists into position, let's say through the hotel networks, so that before the series of fires are ignited, they're able to actually stage what would quite conceivably trigger a catastrophe bond, where the investors lose all the money and the sponsors divide up the proceeds with the Burning Men pyromaniacs. So it's just a theory that I'm developing at the moment, but what's fascinating is it's consistent with my analysis of using the patent office to see if you can reverse engineer the signature at the crime scene and identify who has custody of the patents that cause wrongful death. And the beauty of this is, going back to your little chat with Wilbur Ross, he doesn't appear to know. This is the Commerce Secretary, presumably selected with very careful, diligent, due background checks by President Trump. This is the guy who was 25 years with N.M. Rothschild, and he didn't know that Serco, in November of last year, had processed its 4 millionth patent, and he told you in that interview that Serco had no role. Now, maybe you can just correct me. What exactly did he say?
He didn't want to talk about Serco. He said he wants to talk about space, and that the Patent Office is a government agency that controls itself, is what he said, which seemed kind of like an imprecise answer at best, and also it just seems wrong. He obviously knows about Serco.
Right, so now we've got all of these fires around the world that the warmists like to persuade us that this is caused by anthropogenic global warming, right? And so vast amounts of money are being sidetracked into shutting down the oil industry. And my argument is, from my engineering background, is most of these people, and it's tragic, it's absurd, right? It's really a comment on our education system, particularly the post-secondary education system, right? These people do not understand that carbon dioxide is a wholly beneficial, transparent and odorless fertilizer gas, without which the plants would need vast amounts of toxic or fertilizer in order to grow as enthusiastically as they do. And the greatest growth of plants is in areas of high carbon dioxide, and unfortunately for the world we live in today, but not so much for the apparently the burning men who would like to burn everything down, unfortunately in the world today, carbon dioxide and temperature are at geochronological lows, repeated only once before 300 million years ago. So we're doing precisely the wrong thing. But anyway, what intrigues me about the Burning Man is it seems to be a cult, and maybe that list of oddballs that show up at that festival. But wouldn't it be interesting if a company like Serco, which is probably the world's leading tracker of prisoners and pedophiles. Now, prisoners are because the Serco adopted that ankle bracelet technique that was pioneered in the UK in 1983 by a guy called Tom Stacey of White's Club. And so now Serco, as you know, Jason, I hope our listeners know, was charged with misrepresenting the revenues, its revenues, through fraud on the prisoner tracking program, where apparently up to 3,000 prisoners who either didn't exist or were back in jail or overseas or had never been tagged before, they were charging the taxpayer, if you will. And so what Serco did, or what the government in the United Kingdom did, is they got the services of the City of London police to clear Serco. And Serco is now being given, I think, an £800 million contract in the UK to continue to move prisoners around. And of course, in one of the prisoners in their clutches, who I don't think is going to emerge alive, is Julian Assange.
I hope you're wrong about that.
Now, on the other side, as far as pedophile tracking is, you know, periodically we hear about these raids on pedophile groups around the world. And Serco has developed the face recognition technology with a company here in Vancouver called, well, it was Imagis Technologies, and it's now called Face Forensics, where they're able to search through databases, millions of searches a second, into images of child abuse, rooms inside the hotels around the network, and suspects. So they can put, using artificial intelligence, in which I have a great deal of knowledge from personal experience, they put it all together and they present a list of suspects, let's say, to the FBI in the United States, or to, let's say, is it the International Tribunal of Natural Justice, where the General Counsel is Robert David Steele? I mean, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I mean, I'm aware that it exists. I don't really know what it has achieved other than making a bunch of YouTube videos and, you know, getting testimony from people.
Well, and it is to track child abuse and human trafficking. I mean, that's what it's been set up
it's doing
to do.
something. It's getting testimony from people who I think are survivors, and I know they had some journalists on there, or, you know, I haven't really seen too much about it.
Anyway, so going back, what it would appear to mean is that you can transport prisoners from one jail to another in a manner that may be fraudulent, but let's ignore that for the moment. Meaning you could assemble some pyromaniacs from your prison system, fly them into various hotels in the Sydney area, and issue them with a command to distribute and ignite incendiary devices within the forest and suburbs of Sydney, and create what apparently is described in today's papers or news as a catastrophe. If you go back, was it last year or the year before, at those bizarre fires in California, where PG&E is supposed to have been responsible, right? And I believe PG&E is going to be seeking bankruptcy protection. But I've done an analysis on really bizarre events at, for example, Paradise, where that little town was obliterated, except very oddly the houses were leveled and flattened, but between the houses the trees are still standing.
Yeah.
And the only way I can explain that is if they're using another range of patented technologies developed by an outfit in Ottawa called Nanowave Technologies, in a joint venture with Maxar Technologies, where you could point the energy from a monolithic microwave integrated circuit on various geostationary satellites using a sort of paintbrush technique, and you could literally obliterate houses because you're inducing sparking in the cabling inside the house, which of course is very hot. But that wouldn't necessarily have the same effect on the trees between the houses. So I guess what I'm saying, Jason, is there's a potential here for pyromaniacs to infiltrate, if you will, the Burning Man festivities, and then get trained or educated, if you will, in how to put a pyrotechnic display that impresses the masses, then take that technology into various targeted cities in the Five Eyes countries and use it to destroy property, and then accuse humanity basically of being alive but exuding or exhaling too much carbon dioxide. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. So, but why would they want that if they've got these nanowave lasers that can burn the whole place down? Why do they need the Disney fireworks?
Well, because there's a variety. In some cases, like for example, I think what you'll find in the Sydney area, and there are incendiaries that are placed in the ground. So I've done other searches, and what that shows up, there is a dispenser that you can actually carry in a plane, for example, like a Boeing 727, and it lays down a pattern of, maybe you could find that in your thing, of dragon eggs. Right? Which is filled with incendiaries or ethylene or propylene or whatever it is now. So at night you could fly over an area, right, and drop these things on the area that you want to start the fire. Let's say you've got a prevailing wind that's heading towards a built-up area like Fort McMurray in Alberta, and then you could take out an insurance policy, which would basically be a catastrophe bond, which is a financial or an insurance instrument that has great potential if you can trigger the cat, so to speak. Now, let's say, just going back to the Twin Towers. So on the morning of 9/11, the shareholders of Serco meet on the 47th floor of the North Tower. The chief executive officer comes down from the windows of the World Restaurant and joins them. And he does, well, my question is, what does he do? Because amongst those shareholders would be 10 global custodians, as they're known, with over $100 trillion of assets under management, 3 sovereign states, which would be the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia and Singapore, one, and just one state of the Union, which is California, which is interesting because that's the birthplace of, if you will, the Burning Man phenomena, and then 2 huge pension funds. Obviously, from a scale point of view, the one in the United States is bigger than the one in the UK, that represent the benefits, the retirement benefits of a very interesting group. In the United States, it's called TIAA, Teachers Insurance Annuity Association, which is the world's largest private pension fund with over $1 trillion of assets under management, which represents the retirement benefits, the likes of Bill and Hillary Clinton, Barack and Michelle Obama, and Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn. So they have a vested interest in where TIAA places their retirement funds. On the UK side, you have the Universities Superannuation Scheme, which I think is about £80 billion or $150 billion. That represents the same group of elites, intellectual elites, as the United States. Now, what I'm interested in, what did Christopher Hyman, the chief executive officer of Serco, present to the shareholders? Was it just a sandbox that you and I have discussed in the past? Or here's where I think it could be interesting. Did he offer them an opportunity to take one side or the other of a catastrophe bond, where basically the people sponsoring the bond are afraid of being cleaned out if both towers come down in the same day, notwithstanding it's never happened, even with one tower through fire.
Right.
And the investors are interested in, on the assumption that it's not going to happen, they pick up any money that the sponsor puts on the pot or is an escrow with a law firm. Now, can you see the benefits if you are an insider and you have the technology of the Disney board? You know, you could actually trigger a series of incendiaries inside the elevator shafts, such that you get a top-down demolition in building 1 and 2, boom, 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 as the firefighter said. And in building number 7, you can have a bottom-up demolition, and then you collect the insurance money. Well, it turns out that Serco's chairman, Roy Gardner, is a director of William Hill, the world's largest bookmaker, that has somehow, I asked the Nevada Gaming Commission to pull their heads out of where the sun doesn't shine. How come the Nevada Gaming Commission has given 70% of the Nevada sportsbook business to the British company William Hill?
Yeah, you would think, you'd think they wouldn't want to do that.
Well, I'm absolutely certain they wouldn't want to do it, particularly because one of the angles with sportsbook is, for example, and remember that's what Starnet appears to have been in the business, is you can have Deadpool sportsbook betting, where you're betting on the time of death of a high-value target or the body count at a mass casualty event. Right? So in the building number 1, WTC 1, on the 47th floor, I'm alleging there is a balance of probability argument that they had custody, this is Serco, of various patented devices, including Howard Lutnick's interactive wagering on event outcomes. And just to remind the audience, Howard Lutnick, he had an adjacent mansion to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
And he was the chief executive officer of Cantor Fitzgerald, who conveniently was out of the office when his brother and 657 of his colleagues were about to be incinerated. And if, for example, Howard Lutnick had set up with his colleagues and insiders of Serco, they would have been in a position to bet on the event outcome of the attacks on the Twin Towers. So I think it's spine-chilling, this, and I think it's really germane because, you know, you and I have discussed who could have, and many people do, who could have the mens rea to attack America in the way that America was attacked on 9/11. You know, where you had incredible numbers of dead in given trades or professions, like 343 firefighters.
Yeah.
Or 658 world traders at Cantor Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
Or 197 dead at Aon Corporation on the top of the South Tower. 60 New York police, right? These are massive killings. This is mass murder, Jason.
Well, and you've just asked a very important question, David. You said, who could do it? You mentioned just a few minutes ago, Bill Ayers, Bernardine Dorn. I don't mean to misdirect you, but I've been meaning to tell you this all week, and it slipped my mind. Are you aware that just a few days ago, San Francisco has elected a new district attorney, and it's a guy by the name of Chesa Boudin, whose father was in the Weather Underground, and I believe remains in prison or was in prison while he was a kid. David, this guy was adopted by and raised by Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn, and now he's the district attorney of San Francisco.
I did know that, you see. So going back to the mens rea, I mean, I believe the Weather Underground shared in the mentality of the Burning Man cult.
How do you mean?
Right? That is to say, burn, baby, burn, right? They want to blow things up. They're incapable. They don't have the nous or the brains to construct anything useful. This is a nihilistic organization, right? And earlier on, I read out the kind of guys that showed up at those festivities. Well, it's rather unambiguous. If you've got pyromaniacs showing up at the Burning Man festival, what do they do when they leave the festival? Well, they go and apply what they learned at the festival or the techniques at the festival, how to put on a play, etc., to various target organizations where they want to convey to the public at large, man is destroying the planet, and therefore every opportunity we get, we should destroy people. And that extends ultimately to, you know, late-term abortion, civil wars, etc., etc. That is to say, it's a cult. I mean, I don't think I have any other term for it. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that much about it. It's been around for a while, and I hear about it all the time. I mean, when I was living in LA, there was a lot of people who were kind of going to it all the time. I haven't been to it, but I don't know that if it's fair to say that they're not able to build anything useful. I've seen some pretty creative things going on at Burn. I've never been there, but there's always pictures of really attractive girls wearing crazy costumes and giant devices that people build to, like, you know, like weird bicycles and stuff.
Oh, no, they're capable of building or putting on an art event, but the cornerstone of the festival is to spend a great deal of work building a statue or a shape or a figure and then destroying it. Now, going back to when the Romans invaded England, well, it wasn't called England back then, Britannia, I guess it was called, they came across a group of people called the Druids, right? The Druids had an identical ceremony.
Really?
Jason. Right? They called it the Wicker Man, made out of wicker. And it is alleged by a couple of Roman historians that these were used for sacrifices. That is to say, I don't know, you pop someone inside the Wicker Man and then set fire to it. Right? So what is the difference between the mentality of the Burning Man in California today, and it's on every year, and what the Druids were alleged to have been doing by the Romans? And then if you go into maybe various persons' perverted view of history, you know, like the, I don't know, the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals, and you'll see that the Burning Man is very, very proud of all the radical things that are doing. And all I'm saying is, from tracing the technology that puts on those pyrotechnic displays in the Burning Man, you could take that technology wholesale with your pyromaniacs and your arsonists and the disaffected and move them into areas like in California and in Sydney in Australia, and create a branch office for the Burning Man, except that it happens to be in the suburbs where a whole lot of people are going to lose their homes and in many cases their lives. Over to you.
I did see something that popped up when I was searching here, that Burning Man is opening up. Here it is. Yeah. Some journal. Burning Man Journal. So it says that they're opening, Burning Man opening a year-round office in Reno. Well, David, you know, gambling is legal in Reno. What's going on with William Hill over there?
William Hill is what state is Reno in?
Nevada.
Well, there you go. So going back to the chairman of Serco, who is a director of Willis Faber, which is the insurance company that took out the double occurrence insurance on the Twin Towers.
And the Titanic, right?
And the Titanic. And William Hill, which is the world's largest bookmaker, which has got now 70% of the Nevada Gaming Commission's sportsbook betting, including whatever was being done out of MGM Mandalay Bay Hotel.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So you've got this guy, Roy Gardner, who's got these incredible powerful positions. He's the chairman of Serco, which has effectively $100 trillion of assets under management on 911, met on the 47th floor of the North Tower. And I can only think that the logic of that, right, which would have forced all of the participants into terrified silence, is that he and his colleagues at Serco set up a catastrophe bond, right, where you were given a choice. You could either be an investor or you can be a sponsor. If you're a sponsor and the terms of the catastrophe bond are that the sponsor wants to protect itself against both towers coming down in the same day, which would clean it out, let's say, it puts in, let's say, $100 or $200 million, which is a nice little carrot for the investors who would have been told, well, steel frame buildings don't come down because none ever have in history.
So you're not going to lose your money.
Right? So the I believe the investors put in $6.4 billion.
Wow.
Right? Which is double the amount of the leverage loan that was put together by, what's his name? Larry, who's the guy, the investor in the property?
Oh, Silverstein.
Larry
Silverstein.
Yeah, Larry Silverstein. So Larry Silverstein puts a little bit of chump change. I think he put in $30 million. But the leverage loan or leverage lease required Wells Fargo to put together $3.2 billion, which is a lot of hooch, right?
Yeah.
And so then Wells Fargo would have been very interested in a double occurrence insurance arrangement with William Hill, right, where Roy Gardner is a director, such that if they could arrange for both towers to come down in the same day and incidentally kill 343 firefighters, that's all right, that's just collateral, right, they could double their money.
Well, that's their attitude, of course, that it's collateral. We're just being facetious. We have to be careful because we've got all these guys who are constantly after us for whatever we say. It's really annoying, but, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
yes, okay.
Well, but let me just ask you about this, David, real quick. You've got this image of a cat, I guess, for the cat bond. What's going on with this cat?
Okay, well, the man called Cameron Ortis is a contemporary of Justin Trudeau, the present Prime Minister of Canada, at UBC, University of British Columbia.
And he was just arrested, right?
Yeah, and what's very important is where this leads, because it leads to Starnet, etc., I believe. So Cameron Ortis was arrested and then released on bail, provided he stayed at his parents' home, and he didn't use the computer, right? Then he's been rearrested, and what I think is intriguing, is I think he was rearrested on the 13th of September, 2 days after the federal election began. And then the news was the people in the Five Eyes countries are terrified. Maybe that's my interpretation. They should be absolutely horrified, because what Canada has demonstrated is that you can be the highest position of RCMP intelligence with 25 encrypted computers at your home that, as far as I understand correctly, is they've been programmed so that when you go into the computer, it has software that erases the contents of the disk. Now, why would you have 25 computers? It's like having Robert Mueller as the head of the FBI, and you find at his home 25 computers, all of which are compatible with the software confiscated, let's say, from Starnet. But anyway, I digress.
But no, wait a minute. Wait, let's take everybody back a second, because I don't think most of our viewers, at least not in the American, in the United States, we don't really. Who is this guy? What's happened to him? What was found? Cameron Ortis. So he's the alleged RCMP spy. What is he accused of?
Well, first of all, his position at the time of his arrest was Director General of the RCMP intelligence arm, where he would have had access to all of the secrets, the most strategic and the most important secrets shared amongst the Five Eyes countries that would cover, for example, special ops in Afghanistan or Iraq.
Well, you'd think he would have Jeffrey Epstein stuff, right?
Of course he would have Jeffrey Epstein stuff, because one of the biggest techniques in intelligence or counterintelligence is to get the dope of the kind of people who are trying to get into your networks and then see if you can turn them. And the British are very good at that. Anyway, so this guy, Cameron Ortis, they find 25 computers at his home. Now, I'm quite sure the model of computers that he had at his home will have changed. But let's go back to the period in 1999 when a large number of computers were confiscated and went missing. That is to say, we don't know where they went.
Right.
And they were confiscated from Starnet Communications at 425 Carroll Street, where you and I visited during that wonderful documentary that you did. And the computers that were confiscated by a team of 100 law enforcement officers from the high-tech squad in Ottawa, the RCMP, the Vancouver Police, the Port Coquitlam Police, and I don't know, the North Vancouver Police, together with 2 SWAT teams that crossed the border from the United States. There's the famous question, quo warranto? Who gave the IRS and the customs SWAT teams the authority to come into Canada and possibly take all this kit away that covers some of the most egregious crimes in history? Because what Starnet was accused of doing was producing, creating and sharing, probably over one of these patented social networks, hardcore adult and child pornography. Let me repeat that. They were accused of producing, creating and sharing over computer networks, probably patented, etc., into 60 countries, contents including hardcore adult and child pornography. That's at Starnet. 3 floors, remember, that was emptied. At the same time as Starnet was in action, we have the pig farm going, further down the road. But I don't want to digress. The point is, where did those child abuse images go, and for what purpose were they used? Well, I believe the blackmail and entrapment and extortion operation run by Starnet's handlers takes us back to Serco. And I believe the child abuse images were transferred to the database of the National Crime Squad in the United Kingdom. And I think there's possibly millions of images of child abuse, together with suspects and hotel rooms, that at any time they need to, they can be deployed, and an individual could get a little clip of a video where quite possibly an actor that's been made up to look like this individual has abused a child in a hotel room occupied by that individual when that individual was out, carousing around or whatever, and they've created a play with artificial reality, actors and virtual messages, to give the impression that the individual who had booked that room, right, was actually abusing a child in that room, and those images could be shown or threatened to be shown to the individual spouse, whether that's a man or a woman. So you've got an incredibly ruthless and monolithic conspiracy where I believe millions of people have been entrapped and are being blackmailed as we speak. Over to you.
Well, I wanted to comment on this notion that you've shared about making a, sort of a simulated image of somebody abusing, or just a simulated image of somebody doing anything. A friend of mine in Los Angeles is actually a really prominent Tom Cruise impersonator. He goes by Not Tom Cruise. And this is him, but he's been added to this deep fake roundtable where they've got impersonators of all these famous people, and they sort of start off looking like the famous people, but then they've used this deep fake technology to make them really look like these famous people. So this is a deep fake roundtable that includes my friend Evan, who is not Tom Cruise right there. And I mean, it looks even more like Tom Cruise in the deep fake roundtable than he does when he's just, doing his job as a Tom Cruise impersonator. So the notion that they could do this, it's sort of here. It's right before our eyes.
Yeah, and of course people should pay attention, because you remember the phrase when I created Able Danger, I said, and I've stayed with it ever since, I don't care what the other people associated, and they've given me tremendous information, but I defined or described Able Danger's goal in life was cloud-centric crime scene investigation.
Right.
Now these people have taken control of the cloud, people like Amazon and Facebook, etc., etc. Yeah. And what's really disturbing is, for example, with Amazon, the top 10 institutional shareholders in Amazon are all Serco shareholders that would have met on the 47th floor of the North Tower on the morning of 9/11. And I don't know if you've heard the term techno geeks, but apparently the Burning Man festival attracts techno geeks, and I've got some experience with that. The guy who took over the management of my company in England described software people with the greatest respect. It's like herding cats, right? And software people, sorry?
Well, I've just noticed that this BlackRock Fund Advisors is one of the top 10 owners of Amazon. And if I'm not mistaken, I think BlackRock is the place where Burning Man is.
Pure discovery on the fly, you see.
Well, let me make sure that's correct, because I'm not sure. Well, 2019...
Yeah, BlackRock is the name of the town where they all hang out, right?
Yeah, BlackRock City, right. So what does that mean, David?
Well, it could mean that the city or the geographical area that hosts the Burning Man Festival has lent its name to an investment fund which is invested in Amazon.
Wow.
Now, you and I discussed that in 1998, Amazon bought the Internet Movie Database.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to recruit a team of people for an artificial reality event with geo-reference messages, I presume, I mean, it's your background rather than mine, that's where you might go to find doubles, extras, directors, producers, funders, etc., who are capable of putting on, let's say, what was described by Dr. Thomas Barnett in respect of the people jumping out of the North Tower, presumably just after the Serco folks had vacated the 47th floor. Dr. Thomas Barnett of the Naval War College said, "This is the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history." So my question is, what kind of organization could stage the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history? And I would say the people who confiscated the computers from Starnet.
Hmm.
Because remember, Starnet was engaged in hardcore adult and child pornography production. And by hardcore, I mean that they were torturing the victims, some of whom I believe were drawn from the downtown east side. And although it's too terrible to think of, well, I think we have to imagine that maybe mothers and children were taken into the studios at 425 Carroll Street and killed. And then their bodies taken out to the pig farm to be rendered into sausage meat or used in, dare I say it, cannibal feasts. Over to you.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think if you walked out on the street in New York City and asked a bunch of people if they have heard about Starnet Communications and this raid and all of the truly surprising and shocking things about it, I think probably nobody, very few people, would be aware of it. I had certainly never heard of it until you told me about it. And speaking of discovery on the fly, I noticed before when we were looking at this article, did we know that the Starnet probe was codenamed Project Enigma?
No.
What do you think of that?
No, I don't think so. That's escaped my memory.
Starnet probe code-named Project Enigma. Yes. Scoured the company's business connections, downloaded dozens of website pages, even searched through the garbage at the homes of company executives. This seems like an incredibly thorough operation to have nobody go to jail. It's weird.
Oh, right. So, and the fact is you're talking two levels of fraud here, I think. Spoliation of evidence, which is where you plant evidence or you take evidence and you adapt it, like I was just describing, where you could substitute an actor face in a play inside a hotel room to simulate the behavior or the alleged behavior of a targeted victim for blackmail. That, I suppose, would be described as spoliation. Scrubbing, for me, has a special connotation, which is that you take the evidence, let's say, that's sitting on a computer, and you delete it in a way that it disappears in the memory hole, such that it can't be recovered.
Yeah, well, that's what Hillary Clinton did with BleachBit.
You've got it. You've got it. So I believe scrubbing requires a very skilled group of people, because it's very difficult to erase that level of content from, let's say, the cloud. But one way of storing in a very secure environment, such that if you decided to scrub, you could, is placing it or outsourcing the information technology network of the National Crime Squad to Serco, which is about as daft as you Americans outsourcing the operation of the National Visa Center to Serco, right? Or the Defense Red Switch Network to Serco, or the United States Patent and Trademark Office to Serco, or the United States Defense Ammunition Center to Serco. You know, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
What the hell haven't you guys given to Serco?
So how did that happen? Why are they doing that? Why did they just say, hey, forget this Serco deal, we'll take it all back?
Decades of blackmail. Remember, going back into history, Serco came out of RCAGB 1929. RCAGB, as its name implies, was a subsidiary of Radio Corporation of America, which in World War II was run by a guy called David Sarnoff, who was allegedly on the Marconi wireless telegraph system in New York, communicating with the Titanic, which incidentally, as you pointed out, was insured by Willis Faber. Right? So
which now Roy Gardner is sorry, let's stay on that for a second. So Serco, Roy Gardner, Willis Faber, what was that connect again, David?
Willis Faber insured the Titanic.
Right.
Right? It insured the Twin Towers. It wrote the double occurrence note such that if both towers came down in the same day, they could double their money.
But isn't
so
it
the
true?
Original leveraged lease. Sorry?
Isn't it true, though? I mean, when you're talking about the Titanic, where was it, like, 1915 or something? 1912? Yeah. So, I mean, that had to be one of the most expensive, craziest things ever built at that time, and you would need like the biggest insurance company in the world. I just want to make sure we're not clinging to things that are less coincidental than they seem. I'm playing devil's advocate to test the resilience of the theory, David.
Right. Well, now there were two ships. I think the SS Olympus or Olympic, that was the twin ship to the Titanic. When the Titanic, and this was a piece of brilliant research that was done at Able Danger, when the Titanic was crossing the Atlantic, apparently...
I think it's called the Britannic.
The sister ship to the Titanic? I thought it was called the Olympus or the Olympic.
Well, according to this, it's the Britannic, sister ship of the Titanic, also sank in the Aegean Sea in 1916. Oh, on November 13th.
I'll have to cross-check that.
How come we never hear about that? Wait a minute, David, this is remarkable. So this ship is the sister to the Titanic and it also sank? I thought the thing was supposed to be unsinkable. This is maybe the crappiest design of a ship ever.
Well, I don't know about that, but anyway, the research that was done at Able Danger suggested that there was a telegraph message sent to the Titanic, and Captain Smith, I believe, was asleep in his quarters, but it was received at the telegraph room. Now, whether that decision was made with the captain's knowledge or not, and it ordered the Titanic to change course, and it was on a great circle course, that had it stayed on that great circle course, it would have missed the Titanic. Missed the iceberg.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. The other side of the iceberg, there was a Canadian ship called the SS Mount Temple, that by virtue of sitting the other side of the iceberg, allegedly knew exactly where the iceberg was. And the SS Temple was equipped with the same Marconi telegraph system as the Titanic, and it would have been in a position, potentially, to hack into the communications to the bridge of the Titanic and get it to change course into the iceberg. Now, it's just a theory. All I'm saying is you've got the technology, you've got the communications technology to engage in a hack in 1912, just like I believe they engaged in a hack on 9/11.
Wow.
Get inside the communication systems of the enemy, which in the case of the people who wanted to take down, let's call them potentially the Burning Men cult, right?
Right.
To take down the world's most powerful organization and fake the blocking of the various stages of the attack such that the Americans would wake up that day to be told that there's a guy out there called Bin Laden who's got these incredible techniques of geostrategy where he can delude in the middle of a war game the Americans into switching from simulation exercise to live fire. Over to you.
I'm very hung up on, I don't understand how I could have never before heard that there was a ship that was the sister to the Titanic that also sank. I don't understand why everybody doesn't know about this. I never heard of this before.
Well, actually, and neither do I, because let me do just Olympic.
The largest ship lost in the First World War, all of her 48,000 tons sinking in just 55 minutes. That's remarkably fast.
Okay, I've just Googled Titanic and Olympic, and I've got a link that I'm looking at with the question, did the Titanic really sink or was it Olympic? Now, I don't know where this Britannic, what you've just showed me, I'm a bit astonished because I'd never heard of the Britannic before.
No.
I always thought it was the Olympic, but anyway, I digress. Let me just go back to how you can infiltrate your agents into the patent office of an alleged or ostensible ally. So in September of 1940, Sir Henry Tizard, the chief scientist of the United Kingdom, went on a mission to Washington carrying all of the details of key technologies that would ultimately help the Allies win the war. One of those technologies was the proximity fuse,
Right.
Another was friend or foe swapping, made by an outfit called Ferranti, I think. And the other was the cavity magnetron. There was the calculations for the plutonium bomb and the techniques used by the chain of radar systems across the United Kingdom. All of those technologies were offered to the Americans on the understanding that the British could use the production from the American unused or capacity, because the British, of course, were having their factories and facilities bombed by the Luftwaffe.
Right.
So there was an arrangement there that was, I would say, geostrategic. And I think that exists today, Jason. That is to say, between the British and the Americans, and to a lesser extent the fellow members of the Five Eyes countries, there is an understanding that any patent that is issued by the one can be used by the other. So you've got this theoretically tight network for information technology where you can launch man-in-the-middle attacks on targets, right, from within the Five Eyes countries, which is why it's absolutely strategic that the Americans demand from Canada a complete explanation of what the vulnerabilities are as a result of having Cameron Ortis keeping 25 encrypted computers at his home that were coded, it's beyond me and above my head, such that when you went looking for the content of the disks, they started to erase themselves.
Yeah.
And this guy is the Director General of the RCMP intelligence. Now, interestingly enough, who fast-tracked this guy to that position? It turns out to be Bob Paulson, the former commissioner of the RCMP, who was the arresting officer for the raid on Starnet.
What?
So when all that kit was taken...
Wait a minute.
My assumption is... Go ahead.
So, wait. So the guy who arrested him was...
The people who took away the 100 or whatever it was computers from Starnet, it was a 100-person law enforcement team led by a man called Bob Paulson. He was a sergeant at the time, and he was working on the what do you call it? The Road of Tears, which was where the women were disappearing, mainly Aboriginal women were disappearing on the road up in northern BC. He was following up and chasing down the bikers, who apparently were heavily involved at the pig farm with Starnet. And he went on to Ottawa and ultimately became the Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And he fast-tracked Cameron Ortis into the position of Director General of Intelligence for the RCMP. And apparently they would drink together and, I don't know, play together, do whatever they chose to do together.
Same age as Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau, right? And also at the same university.
Oh, really?
UBC, right? Now, where he was a graduate student or doing a PhD. So Cameron Ortis is 47, Justin Trudeau is 47, and at the time of the raid on Starnet, the roommate of Justin Trudeau, Christopher Charles Invaldsson, would go on to be accused, convicted, and jailed for directing an international pedophile ring. Now, I make no accusations about Justin Trudeau other than the fact he must be, dare I say it, pretty thick not to suspect at least something about his roommate if he actually got charged, convicted, and jailed for directing an international pedophile ring.
Yeah. Well, and
now he goes on to become Prime Minister.
Right. But it would certainly be helpful if you were running an international child porn ring out of Canada to have a highly placed individual in the RCMP be part of your thing to not arrest people.
Exactly. Or keep witnesses in a terrified silence.
Right.
About that pattern for creating and sharing content on social networks, including artificial reality messaging and geo-reference data, that system would be, for me, a perfect vehicle to run the services of Starnet, hardcore adult and child pornography, and online gaming in 60 countries. which would mesh almost perfectly with the Marine Corps intelligence activity co-founded by Robert David Steele that was serving open source intelligence needs in 66 countries. So you can see you got an the Five Eyes countries have an intelligence network that they think, I believe, is pretty safe, but it's not safe at all. It's been totally penetrated, and there's a network of witnesses, participants, and spectators at what I would describe now as a Burning Man event that are too terrified to tell people what's really going on. Over to you.
Well, so he was let out on bail, and then a week ago or so, he was ordered back to jail. This is a story we haven't heard about at all in the United States, but it's pretty interesting. The people, so he's got these computers with encrypted stuff on it that delete themselves when you start looking at them. Doesn't sound like official business there. He's being charged with the Information Security Act, which is essentially espionage, the Canadian version of espionage, I guess. And
Right.
Is there any connection between this guy and Christopher Charles Ingvaldson?
Well, he's 47, Justin Trudeau's 47. They're both at UBC during the period when there's a raid on Starnet. Starnet is accused, but none of the directors have been convicted or jailed. They've all disappeared into the woodwork. Starnet was accused of creating and sharing hardcore adult and child pornography in over 60 countries, together with online gaming that, if it's the formulation that I believe it is, would allow insiders of that network to bet on the time of death of high-value targets or body counts at mass casualty events.
Well, these
So
guys
on
were just like
911,
17 or 18 in 1999, right?
he's 47 now, right? In 1999, what's that? 20 years
20
ago?
years ago. You said, oh, so he's 27.
27 is 47 is 27.
Yeah, actually.
So these are mature individuals
Yeah.
where a contemporary is operating an international pedophile.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. So the question becomes, David, and of course, I believe in Canada he's presumed innocent until proven guilty, and certainly on Crowdsource, the truth he is. Is there some, I mean, it certainly makes sense if nobody's been arrested. I mean, that Newsweek article was describing a pretty extensive search. If they're going through the garbage of everybody and then nobody goes to jail, I think one possible explanation for that is if there's someone in the RCMP who's covering that up. That, I don't know. There's still so many mysteries about this Starnet communications.
Well, I can guarantee you that it would be a terrifying network. Its share value reached over $1 billion, or nearly $1 billion, at the time of the raid. As I say, it was operating this garbage in 60 countries. So I would argue that it probably needs someone to transport the children, right, into these countries. So let's say some potentate in Libya decides that he would like access to a blue-eyed blonde boy. Well, there is a transportation service, right, that's available to supply those kind of needs, as operated by the late Jeffrey Epstein and his pedophile pimp.
That's what I was going to say. And, you know, we're kind of the only people I've heard talking about the fact that it's so strange that he was flying a 727, except that you consider it has this very unique feature of the rear door that Captain Dan Hanley was telling us after 1971 could not be opened in flight. But Jeffrey Epstein's 1969 model, 727, this door could be opened in flight, and anyone who might have been utilized for the type of activity you're describing could be dumped out the back.
And you could also blow out dragon's eggs. If you Google dragon eggs and pyrotechnic and forest fires, you'll see that there's a dispenser, I think it's got patents to protect it, that you could fly at night over an area that you wanted to accelerate the flame base towards the Sydney suburbs, and you could drop the dragon's eggs into the bush. And remember, the Australian police are saying of these fires, 34% are suspicious and 16 or 15% are known to have been set by arson. So 50% of the fires that are bedeviling Sydney, and for all I know Paradise and California, and remember California is the only state in the Union that is a shareholder in Serco, right? So people are having, I believe, their property destroyed in a classic Marxist fashion, you know, confiscate the property of rebels and enemies. Mm-hmm. And basically, you've got the technology that potentially would allow you to leave no trace or scrub the evidence on computers for people who know about those kind of things, like presumably the high-tech squad from Ottawa that raided Starnet. So I come back to the question that I think could be put to Bob Paulson, right, or whoever. Where did the kit go after the Starnet raid of the 20th of August of 1999? And I believe it was absorbed into a number of networks, including the National Crime Squad in the United Kingdom and the sportsbook operations of William Hill, such that on 911 you could wager on the event outcomes in live time during the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history. Not my words, the words of Dr. Thomas Barnett of the Naval War College. Over to you.
Well, David, we've been covering a wide array of topics today, but that's sometimes the most interesting type of show. We're pretty much out of time for right now. Was there anything else you wanted to discuss?
I think I'd like to get inserted in people's heads, and it's not a proof, that perhaps the organization that attacked America on 9/11 is not the Bin Laden group from its offices in London, but the Burning Man group from its offices in cyberspace, consistent with apparently a large number of the people who show up at those festivals are techno geeks from Silicon Valley.
That's
right?
true.
So I know these kind of people from bitter experience. They're very bright, they're geeks, they're nerds, they don't have a decent social life, they sit in front of the computer, and I believe, you know, they're quite capable of saying, well, between ourselves, we should be running the world, right? And I just leave that thought with the listeners, and you know, hopefully they'll find some interesting leads through our networks. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, David, if people are seeing us for the first time today, there's always new viewers joining us on Crowdsource the Truth. I want to let everybody know that they can see David Hawkins' Reverse CSI every Friday. Usually it's at 1 o'clock. Sometimes we shift it around a bit, but it's happening on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. This has been a special presentation today that we're putting out on YouTube to maximize viewership. I hope that people will go to your Patreon page, David, and sponsor you. They can see your daily posts there, and they can interact with you by sending a message to become a sponsor and watch the sponsor exclusive shows every Friday. You can also see them on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. There's a wide array of programming on there that people can enjoy. And of course, David, your wonderful website, the free website, is reversecciscripts.com. You can read all about the different time, you know, technologies, I forget the name of these clocks, David.
Yeah, well, the one above is the clock outside the Greenwich Maritime Museum.
Right.
And it was invented by a guy called Shepherd in 1848, I think. And the one below is slave to the cesium fountain clock at the National Physical Laboratory. Effectively, RCA and its legator companies, going back to the Anglo-American Telegraph Company, have controlled time for the last, well, nearly 200 years.
Wow.
That is to say, controlled the most accurate time needed to stage, let's say, a snuff film, where the different components necessary, like the cleanup crew or the snuffing crew or the camera crew, they can come in without knowing what each other's doing, but they're perfectly synchronized. And I think That's terminology that you from your Hollywood days will probably know better than I do, where you're blocking a stage play.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely blocking the scenes. Well, David, that's all for today. Thank you so much for another intriguing presentation. I want to thank everybody for watching. Don't miss tonight. We're going to have John Cullen's Las Vegas investigation, also on Patreon. So I'll see everybody later. Thanks for watching.